This is your communication podcast with Teresa. The last chapter already, chapter 10, the process of political negotiation. Not the most riveting stuff, I'm not going to lie, but as always, I'm here for you and I'm going to try and make it as interesting as possible. Yeah! We're jumping right in, political negotiation, and not quite bargaining, schnookies. You have to watch out, get the distinction right. We are talking about a process of communication in which two or more conflicting parties with a vested interest in the issues at stake strive to reach a mutually binding political agreement. And how do they do that? Through the exchange of structured information over a period of time. So yes, negotiation in the political scene is definitely a long-term process. Just think about the kind of negotiations that have to take place if there are trade agreements that have to be made, or if you want to come to a certain conclusion to do with immigration or nuclear disarmament. These are definitely issues where there has been a lot of negotiation in the past, and you can hear that these issues are so important and there are so many different perspectives on these issues that negotiation is very often the way forward. We also already know from our organizational communication that negotiations can sometimes reach a point where the parties are not really open anymore toward these negotiations. In this case, we are bringing in the mediator. More on the mediator in a little bit. I think the definition is also very good in pointing out that every party in the negotiation process has an ideal outcome to the negotiations. Every party comes in with their minds made up of what they want to take out of it. Yeah! So what happens very often with such laden concepts like immigration or nuclear weapons or trade agreements is that there will be political conflict. Because ultimately, we are sitting in a situation where different parties have different goals and they have different interests. And this is exactly what we found out in organizational communication. This is what leads to conflict. We need to apply negotiation skills. We need to apply persuasion in order to handle this conflict in a constructive and in a positive manner. It has also been done in the past that conflict has actually popped up and people didn't do anything about it. In the political sphere, not such a good idea. Avoidance, it breeds discontent. Also, we need to keep in mind that politicians do stand as examples to the people. If they cannot get along with somebody, maybe internationally, then it usually sets a bad tone for the people as well. They might mirror and that particular contempt. It actually will deepen the differences between groups and it will polarize different groups more and more. Just think of the Middle East and the United States, for example, or think of Mexico and the United States. This very open disregard by the American leader will obviously have an effect on how people in the United States think of the Middle East or think of Mexico as well. Yeah! I think what is very important to bring up in the realm of negotiation in a political context is the power idea. Now, power, of course, plays a huge role when it comes to conflict resolution or when it comes to handling conflict, as we already know. We also need to understand that in political negotiations, especially multilateral negotiations, as in international negotiations, there are different power relationships. The Prime Minister of New Zealand, however awesome she might be, and she really is, does not really hold a candle to an Angela Merkel or Boris Johnson. They are just more powerful. So we just want to remind ourselves about some of the things to do with power. For example, that power is always relative, and that it might be real or apparent. Of course, Boris Johnson is in no way more powerful than the New Zealand Prime Minister. However, it is apparent due to the economic standing of the two countries that he has indeed a little bit more to say. Of course, power is situational and it can only exist to the extent that it is accepted. if you are meeting with a Donald Trump, you can say no to what he is proposing. Very often, however, we don't do that. What is also quite interesting is that power is relative and that it changes over time. I mean, now just think of China and how China has just re-emerged as one of the absolute superpowers in the world. They will overtake other countries in terms of their gross domestic product very soon. So here we go. Power definitely changes over time. Yeah! Let's come to the end of our tentative look at negotiations. Seeing that power can be a complicating factor, seeing that the issues that we have to negotiate about are very close to the politician's heart, we need to set 5 conditions that will help with political negotiation and that will seize the conflict from happening. Number 1, the conflicting parties and their supporters must have positive expectations about negotiations. You think this is clear, but no, people don't always feel like that. People sometimes go into negotiation settings saying, it's not going to help anyway, or it's not going to work anyway. Not a very good precondition if that's how you feel. Secondly, there must be a firm decision by the parties in favor of political settlement. When we are talking about a settlement, we kind of can already hear that we might have to give something up. A settlement is not a true win-win. But yes, the decision needs to be made that a little bit of give is also required to get a bit of take. Number 3, the power bases of the respective negotiating parties must be more or less evenly balanced in order to make possible give and take negotiations. So coming back to the uneven power relationships, I think this is a very noble precondition that they're bringing up here. But in reality, it doesn't happen like that. Even with these huge bodies like the United Nations or UNESCO, it seems that the more powerful countries in the world have more of a say. Yes, on paper, one country, one vote, especially when it comes to the United Nations. But there are so many things going on behind the scenes, and the deep structure is so divided in terms of power. So don't be fooled. There are always uneven power relationships. And to balance these uneven power relationships is an impossible task. Number 4, the conflicting parties to negotiation must be legitimate in the sense that they have a broad support base. Of course, nobody who doesn't have supporters will even be heard in political negotiation. So that's why the politicians that usually partake in these negotiations have already been voted in, have been legitimized through an election, and actually have a significant showing in these elections. They have the support of the citizens. Number 5, the last one, the negotiating parties ought to be versed in the dynamics of negotiation. Now, there you have to be a bit careful because different people and different cultures have different ways of negotiating. If you are negotiating within your own country between the different parties, then it's not so much a problem. But just think about the kind of negotiation tactics that the United States use. They are very, very direct in the way that they're negotiating. They put it all out on the table. They are not shy to make concessions, but also to threaten the negotiating partners. Whereas somebody from Asian countries would be much more indirect. We have discussed the different cultural indices by Hofstede, and we know that there are masculine and feminine cultures, direct and indirect cultures, collective and individualistic cultures. And all of that comes into these negotiation styles. Yeah! Here we go. We have a preliminary overview of negotiation in politics. And what you should take out of it is that negotiation can actually prevent destructive conflict between different parties or between different nations. I hope you enjoyed it, Schnuckies. Until next time, bye!